What's up, YouTube? This is 82 and 0. Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about, in honor of Black History Month, one of the greatest contributions basketball history, one of the greatest teams prior to the NBA. We're going to be talking about the 1943 Washington Bears. So, prior to the NBA and after its creation, uh, after the creation of basketball, um, the league was not basketball was not organized. Okay. Baseball had the MLB, hockey had the NHL, football had the NFL and AFL, whatever. I don't give a shit. But basketball was different because there were all these different basketball leagues that sprung up all over the country. You had leagues like a really early attempt at professional basketball, the ABL, which the original Celtics were part of. You had the Eastern Basketball League, Continental Basketball League. Actually, I think that was later. Pennsylvania Basketball League, but you get the point. And so, how they orchestrated determining who the best team was in this era prior to the NBA is you had what I call, in my opinion, the Super Bowl of basketball. It's called the World Professional Basketball Tournament. It went from 1939 to 1948. It was sponsored by the Chicago Herald-American, and they were adamant about taking whoever they felt were the best teams in the world. Okay, well, I say world and they say world, but I don't know if there was international teams, but that's besides the point. They were the best players in the world at the time. But they took black teams like the Harlem Globetrotters, the New York Reds, and the Washington Bears. And, teams that we have today, like the Pistons and Lakers, were champions during this time. But as the tournament would go on and the BAA was created, which would later become the NBA, it became a more streamlined, organized league, and a lot of teams would jump ship over there. So there wasn't really as much of a need for the World Professional Basketball Tournament. And when I said they're like the Super Bowl, I mean it was a one and done tournament. It wasn't a best of seven. You played the team. If you lost, you're out. But the best black players in the world got their chance to shine in this tournament. Because at the time, the prevailing notion was that black players couldn't play basketball. I remember a few years back, I was reading an article during the World Professional Basketball Tournament where the Minneapolis Lakers were playing the Harlem Globetrotters. And all these sports commentators were betting on the Lakers because they said, oh, blacks can't play basketball. So the best black players in the country got to get together and show that they meant something, that they're there for a reason, that they are the best of the best, right? And I have a channel like this to keep their stories alive. Maybe some other time I can talk about the Wrens or Globetrotters, but I feel like there's a lot of videos that cover the Globetrotters and Wrens, but there's not really any that cover the Washington Bears. So I just want to go ahead and cover it. Um, most of the Washington Bears team was former Globetrotters and New York Reds. And prior to making this video, when you try to look up the stats, um, this era was really hard to find players' stats. And I know everybody watching this channel knows I'm pretty passionate about defending players of the past, teams of the past. And I know a lot of people my age and a little bit older, they like to say, "Oh, the 1960s were the Wild West. They didn't keep track of stats. They whatever." You've heard all that, right? This is the Wild West of basketball, the 1930s, 40s. This is the actual Wild West of basketball. Um, teams, these professional teams, They were known as barnstormers. What that means is teams like the Bears, they would just play whatever team was in front of them. Okay, they didn't really have leagues. You get what I'm saying? One day they might be playing the Globe Trotters of this league or the New York Celtics of this league. They just played whoever was in front of them. And this was a very hard time because, segregation was still legal. Uh, the Bears, as they were traveling, they had to put money aside in their budget to fix their car or their van because, there were times that the, the bus would break down and they had to keep going. So, these players weren't making a lot of money. Yeah, it was definitely their life, right? Uh, there weren't endorsements. They did it because they loved the game. And, they weren't allowed to stay in hotels. They had to eat cold food because they didn't have refrigerators. They slept in their van. They were treated horribly by fans. Fans could say whatever they wanted to them. And not only that, they had very biased officiating. So, what was good about the World Professional Basketball Tournament, it gave them a chance to prove that they are the best in the world. Um, so, what is the 1943 Washington Bears story? Um, in this era, teams they were usually sponsored by a company, right? Like the Detroit Pistons that we have today. At the time, they were known as the Fort Wayne Zollner Pistons because they were owned by Fred Zollner. And the Washington Bears, their jerseys would say Lichtman Bears because at the time they were owned by Lichtman, who he was a successful businessman, Abe Lichtman. He owned a bunch of movie theaters and he catered mostly to black audiences. And it was also run by a black radio legend, Hal Jackson. Um, so, anyways, let's talk about their story. Um, and this is an article I have pulled up. It's um, it's from the website, the New Black Fives Homage. Anyways, I'm just gonna read this to you guys. The 1942-43 Washington Bears were the only major professional basketball team to ever go undefeated in the course of a season. And you might put an asterisk on that, whatever. You might say, well, they were barnstorming, but nonetheless, nobody's done it since or before. They were an all-black team owned by Abe Lichtman, a Jewish owner of movie theaters, as I mentioned, who catered to a black audience. The Bears almost exclusively featured former members of the New York Renaissance, including player coach Tarzan Cooper, which I'll get into the players in a minute. The World Professional Basketball Tournament was an invitational tournament that featured many of the best professional basketball teams in the world, operating out of Chicago and run by the Chicago Herald-Tribune. It was the only basketball organization to explicitly accept black teams, and its first two champions in 1939 and 40 were the Renaissance and Globe Trotters, respectively. In 1942-43, the Bears received a bye as one of the highest profile teams in the tournament, along with the Trotters, Fort Wayne Zollners, and Sheboygan Redskins, which I believe the Redskins will later become the Hawks. I gotta look that up. As such, the first game was in the quarterfinals against the Rock Springs Sparklers, a University of Minnesota alumni team led by future NBA champion Tony Jaros and Jaros' future coach John Kundla. They blew them out 40-21. The Redskins and Globe Trotters both crashed out of competition in the quarterfinals. Um, and I want to explain that. The I don't know if this is true or not. I've heard that the World Professional Basketball Tournament didn't want two black teams in the finals against each other. I don't know if that's true. I've only heard that, but they wanted the best white team, quote unquote, against the best black team. Um, but yeah, that's why you didn't see the Globetrotters playing the Washington Bears. But anyways, Uh, where am I at? They blew out their competition in the quarterfinals. So the Bears got a relatively easy semifinal matchup against the second best service team in Dayton and won 38-30. In the championship, they played a rough defense on Leroy Edwards and took him out of his element. And Leroy Edwards was, by many, considered to be the best player all around of the 1930s. I did a video on him a couple years back, and one of his descendants commented. I believe it was his granddaughter, grandson. I don't remember. And I thought that was interesting that they commented. But Edwards was like the LeBron James of that era. He could do everything. So, anyways, in much of the same way NYU famously had defeated Leroy Edwards in college, both Bears' starting backup centers fouled out despite conservative officiating, and they held Edwards to a single make from the field. John Isaacs and Pop Gates led the way for Washington in a conceiving 43-31 championship win in front of 12,000 in attendance. Um, so going on with this, I'm going to talk about the players, but anyways, they won the championship in 43. Um, they defeated Leroy Edwards, who, like I said, was one of the best players in the league or in the world at that time. And we'll talk about some of their players. They had Tarzan Cooper, Charlie Isle, Charlie Isles, William Dolly King, Johnny Isaacs, William Pop Gates, Clarence Puggy Bell, Zach Clayton, Robert Sonny Wood, and Jackie Bethards. Now let's talk about some of these players because they don't get talked about enough. Um, Puggy Bell is one of the most versatile players in professional basketball during his career that stretched over parts of 3 decades. Bell was a very strong player with a soft touch. He could rebound and play aggressively under the basket, and he also spent his time developing his passing skills. Tarzan Cooper, one of the best centers of the 1930s. At this point in his career, he was a backup. He was a player coach for the Washington Bears, so he wasn't playing a lot of minutes. Uh, Dolly King was their starting center. But anyways, Charles Cooper was a star basketball player at Central High School in Philadelphia. At age 18, he signed to play for the Philadelphia Panthers, a local black team, from where he launched a 21-year basketball career. In 1929, Cooper joined the New York Rens. When the New York Celtics faded with age in the 30s, the Rens rose to prominence with most of the powerful independent teams in the league, in the country. Uh, And I remember reading that the New York Celtics player, Joe Lapchick, had called Tarzan Cooper the greatest player he ever seen play, which, if that's true, uh, we got robbed. I mean, there's not footage of this guy. There's nothing. We're just going off of, we can't even really go off of stats. We just got to go off of witnesses telling us what they saw. Now, Charlie Isles was a basketball star at DeWitt High School in New York City with the powerful Harlem YMCA team. He went on to play for the Professional Basketball League in the 1930s until 1950. It doesn't say what league, it just says professional. Like I said, there was a lot of leagues at the time. Uh, but he was a member of the 1943. Okay, what you guys already know. Pop Gates. I consider Pop Gates to be, from everything I've read, the best basketball player of the early 1940s. Um, and I can't, like I said, I can't really go off of stats. You can't really go off of footage. You could just go off of what you read, okay? And everywhere I read, with, the exception of that Tarzan Cooper mention, where I said, Lapchick said he was the best player he ever seen. Most of the sources I read say that Pop Gates was the best basketball player in the world in the early 1940s. And I do think it's interesting. He would later go on to actually play one season in the BAA at the end of his career. And I mean, this guy, I shouldn't say the end of his career, but he played in the BAA. But anyway, and he played for the NBL, ABL, bunch of independent leagues, but he would play up until 1957. He had a long career, um, playing from 1937 to 57. Johnny Isaacs was actually born in Panama. He grew up in New York City. Everything I read was he was their shooter for the team. He hit the big shots when they needed him the most. He lived a pretty long life. He actually died in 2009. He was getting close to 100. Dolly King, who was their best center, their starting center, was a multi-sport star at Alexander Hamilton High in Brooklyn. He attended Long Island University where he played football and basketball. After college, signed to play professional basketball with the New York Reds. Like I said, a lot of the Bears were former Reds or Globetrotter players. Sonny Wood, he was born in New York City, and Sonny Wood led the Benjamin Franklin High School to the 1941-1942 New York City High School Championship, which is crazy because that's just 1 year prior to them winning the championship at 43. He was pretty young. Zach Clayton graduated in 1937 from Gratz High School in Philadelphia, where he starred in football, baseball, and basketball. He attended Alabama State College and Temple University before dropping out for financial reasons. Clayton played professional baseball and basketball for 15 years. Um, in 1974, Clayton was the referee for the famed Rumble in the Jungle heavyweight champion fight between Muhammad Ali and George Foreman. Interesting fact. Um, I couldn't find much information on Jackie Beathard's, but I should just note he played 21 years. I mean, like I said, there's not a lot of information on all these players. But why am I making this video? Uh, they're the greatest basketball team of the 1940s, okay? Undefeated, 43-0. They had, Pop Gates, who was widely considered one of the best players of all time at that point. They proved themselves at the highest stage, defeating Leroy Edwards, who was considered the best white player in the league in the world. Saying the league, the world. And it's important that we keep teams like this memory alive because there's not a lot of information about them out there. It's good to remember them because teams like this don't get talked about. Uh, Anything prior to the NBA and even early NBA teams just don't get talked.
With their mascot leading off, here they come from the nation's capital, those sensational 1943 champions, the Washington Bears. Outstanding among an all-star team are Pop Gates, Johnny Isaacs, and Dolly King. They're warming up. After a remarkable string of 35 victories, they're in the final. The Oshkosh team, their opponents, the 1942 champions, and they are mighty tough. It's the start of the game, and Oshkosh has the ball. Both teams played as perfect basketball as the crowd ever saw. 12,000 fans saw the game, pro basketball's largest audience of all time. Oshkosh starts scoring early, but then the Bears take the ball and pile up a lead that was never seriously threatened. Another basket for the Bears, and then another free throw. Their teamwork is amazing. An airtight defense, terrific shooting, and ball handling that had the crowd whistling. It's a great exhibition of basketball at its best. There's a free throw for Oshkosh. But the Washington Gage crew will not be denied, and they sweep on to victory. Pop Gates with 10 points and Johnny Isaac with 10 lead the new champions to their crown. And the strategy of Dolly King at center was a revelation to those who thought they knew something about basketball. The game ends 43-31, and they are the world's greatest basketball team.